American cities are newly constructed. Why do we see famous structures such as the Washington Capitol building with consistent infrastructure that buries very deep into the ground? And again, the inconsistencies do not add up. Why would an underdeveloped people waste resources, energy, and time constructing the foundations of the Capitol building to be consistent with the column style we find above the surface? The foundations did not have to feature columns. Columns, we are told, are a stylistic choice, not a functional one. So why would they do this? In a nutshell, they wouldn't. We see images that suggest that the people of the 19th century were actually concerned with moving a lot of the vast amount of mud we see, leveling the ground and excavating existing structures. The consistency and prevalence of buried architecture across our realm indicate that whatever happened was a worldwide event, despite regional differences in natural topsoil accumulation and erosion. And there is no official narrative explanation that justifies the buried architecture we see. No explanation provided to justify the amount of mud we see in 19th century photographs of our cities. On the roads, mud piles from clearing, the roads uneven, the land ravaged, but the architecture grand, perfect, and intact. Applauded by literary scholars for his use of fog as an opening simile and metaphor to paint a portrait of London as a corrupted hub amidst burgeoning industrialization, many often overlook that Charles Dickens's 1852 novel Bleak House actually opens with a different image. London, Michaelmas term lately over, and the Lord Chancellor sitting in Lincoln's Inn Hall. Implacable November weather. As much mud in the streets as if the waters had but newly retired from the face of the earth. Liquefaction caused havoc across Christchurch and the Garter. But these were isolated earthquake events, and only portions of each city were affected. It is not possible for there to have been huge, simultaneous earthquakes around the world during a similar period. Or is it? Even Wikipedia tells us that liquefaction can occur naturally or artificially, from an earthquake or other sudden change in stress condition. Even if this was the case, we do not see the same structural damage to the buildings in the 19th century like we do in cases such as Christchurch and the Garter. Most of the buried architecture we see is intact. It has either sunken or the ground level has been raised at least 3 meters, sometimes in a uniform manner, and other times partially buried in rolling mud hills, as if there were huge landslides. The strange case of the buried architecture provides the following conclusions. that what lies beneath are not the remains of previous civilizations. More often than not, the buried structures are consistent with the architecture we see above ground, that the structures are much larger than originally suspected, and therefore they are even more of a construction impossibility for a Victorian generation of horse and cart, and those existing before them. That natural topsoil accumulation and soil liquefaction are not satisfactory explanations for what we see here. Whatever took place had to be something much larger and widespread, such as a natural or artificial earthly cataclysm of sorts. As many of the photographs show, many citizens of the 1800s were responsible for moving much of the mud, leveling the ground, and excavating buildings, which suggests that whatever happened had happened very recently in their past. The complete absence of a reasonable, mainstream justification for the buried architecture we see suggests that the controllers of our realm are deliberately trying to hide whatever happened. And what of the deserted cities we see in the earlier photographs? If these cities were truly empty, then we must ask why. We must also ask how all the people got there in the end. In the space of 30 or so years, we see a city go from barren to bustling.